Alright, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about the financial side of forest creation. How much does it cost to plant a forest, and how does that forest generate money into the future? Firstly, we're creating forests because we love forests, but also we want to see more continuous growth forests in the UK. That's forests that produce timber, but also have high biodiversity and are also attractive places to be. That's in the opposite to what most commercial forests in the UK that produce timber at the moment, which operate under the clear fell method. Great at producing timber, but at the expense of biodiversity and attractiveness. But this is also an investment. It costs a lot of money to create a forest, so it needs to produce income into the future to make it financially viable. So today I'm going to be talking about the costs that relate to our forests, and although there's many similarities between forests created all over Scotland and the UK, there are some specifics to our site which wouldn't apply elsewhere, and things that other sites would have that wouldn't be applicable here. So this is very high level, so just take it all as a very much approximation, just getting my caveats in there. I'm going to use a per hectare rate just to make it easier to compare, and a hectare is just over a football field in size. So I think the best place to start is, well, how much does it cost to buy land for forest creation in the first place? And I mean, that's quite an open-ended question, because obviously there are many different factors that influence land prices, and also how much of the area that you're buying can you actually plant, what types of trees you can plant. So it's a very large variety, but I would just say that the land here, and you've seen in the previous videos what kind of trees we're planting, you know, a good mixture of different broadleafs and conifers, and it's quite flexible in terms of what trees we can grow. So we paid £7,500 per hectare, and this was 2.5 years ago now, and land prices have risen since then, so approximately you might be looking at £10,000 per hectare for land that you can plant with trees now. And that does vary, of course. If you were there's much less flexibility, you'd probably pay less than that, but if the land was much higher quality, you'd probably pay more for that. But we're probably on the borderline here, because land which is much higher quality is probably better used for agricultural purposes. So, but let's not get into that discussion now. The other thing to say is that that price I mentioned included 20% of the land that we bought is currently woodland, so we obviously can't plant forests there, but we can hopefully convert that to continuous cover as we go along. Okay, so we bought the land. The next step was doing the plans. So we did a lot of the work ourselves because we decided we wanted to be more directly involved with that. We wanted to learn ourselves how the process went, and we of course got specific advice from experts when we weren't sure what to do or we wanted our plans checked. So I think we got quite a good scheme because of that, but of course only time will tell. So once you got your permission to create the forest, then the next stage is preparing the site. So here there's a few things that we had to do. So we had to do the mounding, so that's where each tree gets its own mound, and that cost us about 30p per mound. Then we had to put a fence around the site to keep out the deer specifically, but other animals as well, to stop them eating the trees. So we paid about £20 per metre. So ours was probably more complicated than most, so it's probably has cost us more because of that. You know, well, we also use higher grade material because we hope the fence will last a lot longer, because with continuous cover we do need the fence to keep going into the future, because that's going to help make sure that we can have natural regeneration in the forest rather than having to plant all the new trees in tree tubes. So we have had to spend more up front because of that, but we should hopefully get a much higher quality product, or we have got a much higher quality fence because of that. So that was £20 per metre. We then had to do some bracken and gorse control, and those costs are it's kind of quite variable based on site, but we had to pay quite a lot because it's a really steep slope that ours is on, and also that work has to carry on into the future, especially with the bracken. You know, we've already shown that we had to do bracken work this year to make sure the trees have got enough light so they can grow. So that's kind of very much ongoing costs. So I would have guessed somewhere we probably paid very high cost, probably like £1,000 per hectare to remove bracken last year, and with the gorse it was probably something similar, but we had much smaller areas of gorse. And the final preparation works was the tracks that we put in. So they're called forest roads, but they're just aggregate tracks, and no asphalt, no tarmac on there. That was the one that's cost us quite a lot of money. That's, you know, I'm talking very broad sums here, but it's cost us about £50 per metre of track that we built, and that's about we have different specifications, but let's say about 3 meters wide. You can actually drive kind of cars on there this kind of year when the weather's good. In the winter it's probably only like 4x4 use. So that was not essential for the planting works, but for long-term maintenance that's really going to help us. So we decided to put in our own money for that. You don't get any grant money, but our own money in for that to make it easier for us to manage the forest going forward. Okay, so the preparation's done. Now it's time to actually plant the trees. So we've got 60,000 trees, and per tree roughly we spend about 40p per tree, and that varied from birch, which cost us 25p per tree, right up to the redwoods, which cost us £1 per tree. So yeah, it come out 40p average. So most of them were between 25 and 55 pence per tree, and a few were over that, but we didn't have so many of like the redwoods, so that didn't affect the price too much. Then you have the bollgards. So all the broadleaf trees had to be planted in bollgards to protect them from voles. Otherwise the voles like nibbling the bottoms, and that kills the trees. And the bollgards were 17p each, and the canes were like 4p each, which obviously you think, oh, it doesn't sound like much money, but then we had to do 40,000 of those, and so what's that? That's like £10,000 worth there we had to spend. And interesting, that was the one place where there was quite a difference in the cost. Even though they were the same manufacturer, we went to different places and the cost came back quite different. And then it comes to actually planting the trees. So we had professionals planting those for us, and you can go back and watch one of the videos I did on that. And so the trees, the broadleaf trees, had to be planted with bollgards. They were 45p per tree, so that's because it's quite a bit more complicated. They were quite a bit more than the conifers, which were only like 19p per tree to plant, because obviously when you have the bollgards, it's taking them longer to both plant each tree and put the bollgard and the cane in, but also the fact they can not carry so much or carry so many trees at a time, so they have to keep going back to the store to basically pick more trees up. So it just takes a lot more time in general. So next we come on to the grants, so the money that the government pays to people to plant forests. So for us in Scotland, it's done on it's basically a per hectare arrangement. So most of the costs are kind of lumped together. So you get like a planting cost for productive broadleaf trees, and we also use the option for diverse conifers, so a mixture of different conifers. So with the broadleaf trees we're getting like 3,500 per hectare, and for the conifers it was like 2,500 per hectare roughly. So that kind of covered the actual trees, doing the mounds, the canes, the actual planting itself. That was all included in that. And then there's a other separate items. For example, the fence was a separate item, so that cost the grant gave us like about £10 per metre, and like I said before, it cost us £20 per metre to put the fence up. So there's quite a big difference there between what the grant pays out and what it actually costs, and that's partly because the grant scheme is actually quite a few years old now, and the costs, especially of fencing, have gone up, and the grant scheme hasn't caught up yet. The fortunate thing is that in the area here we actually get a bigger grant. So we got another, I don't know, £1,500 per hectare in extra grant money because of the location, and that's to kind of incentivize people to plant trees in this area. But actually we needed that money to pay for that extra fencing cost. So when I say incentivize, I mean that would generally, the hope was originally that would be like a profit for the landowner, so they would think, oh, it's beneficial to plant trees on their land because they make a bit of money. But obviously we haven't made any money there. That's just gone straight into putting up the fence in our case. And then the other grant you get is called a maintenance grant. So every year for the next 5 years we'll be paid a maintenance grant, and that's based on the types of trees you plant. So for the broadleaf areas we're going to get just under £600 per hectare per year, and for the conifer areas I think it's like about £350 per hectare per year. So that's basically, the broadleaves are harder to look after. To get established, probably more will die. You'll have to kind of do more vegetation work, whereas the conifers kind of look after themselves a bit more. So yeah, that's really important to make sure the forest gets established, because those early years are like the important years in terms of like the hardest, with the vegetation, as we've seen here already, to get it going. So what does this mean overall? Well, basically the grant money has paid for all the planting works, except the road building, which I said before we had to put our own money in for that. So the grant money we got from the government, that's basically paid for all the trees and all the fencing costs and all those things. So that's from that point of view, that's great. We only had to put in the money to build the roads. But of course, this is, like I said before, this is a financial investment. So how do we actually make money going into the future? Well, of course, the first thing is this is a forest. We're hoping to produce timber, but trees take a long time to grow. And although we might potentially start making a bit of income in, say, 20 years time, but that will be quite low value timber to start with. It will probably be 30, 40, 50 years until we can start taking out higher value timber. But that's obviously a very long time to wait for a financial investment. So here and on most other, well, I say most, on a lot of other forestry creation schemes in the UK, you can get something called carbon units. So this is where you're basically sequestering carbon in the new forest. So you're storing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and you're storing it in the forest, in the soils, in the ground, and in return for that you get a carbon unit. And that unit you can then sell to people and businesses who are wanting to offset their carbon. So it's very important that, you know, obviously the business and people should first of all reduce the amount of carbon they're emitting into the atmosphere, but there's normally some residue, some things that you can't eliminate yet. So in those respects, you can buy carbon units to supplement and to kind of offset your emissions. So here we're going to be getting about, in the region of about 10,000 units for the forest that we created here. And in the current market, with the current valuations of carbon units, that would equate to about the money that we put into the forest ourselves. So that's in terms of the land prices and also in terms of the road building that we've done. So if we sold all the carbon units up front, we would get all our money back and we'd end up with a free forest, which that would be great, wouldn't it? But it's likely that we won't sell them up all together up front. We'll probably sell a certain percentage up front and then maybe more over the coming years. And there's lots of reasons for that, and I won't go into that here, but I'll go into that in another video. But that basically shows that we can actually make a good financial return early on until we start producing timber, and then from there the timber will take over into the long-term future, the long-term revenue of the forest. So this is an investment, it's a business, it's a way of producing resources for society to use. So that's the long-term hope, is that we're producing timber here. Alright, so I hope you found the video useful. Maybe you have some insights yourself if you've done a scheme, so maybe post some thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying following along, and I'll see you in the next video.